At 4 in the morning, every dog inside the Ashfield County shelter threw its head back and howled at the same instant. One long, aching voice that climbed the cinder block walls and rattled the tin roof. Nora Fielding sat straight up in her cot behind the office, flashlight already in her hand, heart slamming against her ribs before her feet even hit the cold concrete floor. Before we go on, drop a comment and tell me what part of the world you're listening from, and hit that subscribe button so you don't miss a story like this one. She had run the little county kennel for 11 years, and she had never in her life heard the pack sing together like that. Not on the 4th of July, when the fireworks split the sky over the water tower. Not the spring the tornado siren went off at 2 in the afternoon, and every trailer in the county emptied into the ditches. This was different. This was not fear. It was something older than fear, older than any of them, and it had a direction. The flashlight beam trembled in her hand as she pushed through the swinging door into the main run. 40 pairs of eyes swung toward her at once, and then swung right back to the same place. Every single dog, from the little terrier mix in the front cage to the shepherd that had been dropped off Saturday morning, was pointed at the same back wall. The wall that faced the empty stubble field behind the building. The wall that faced the dark. The howling did not stop when the light hit them. If anything, it grew louder. It became a rope of sound, and the rope was pulling. Toby Marlowe came pounding down the hall in his sock feet, with his coat half on and a hunting rifle in his hand that he had grabbed without thinking. Toby was 22 years old, skinny as a fence post, and he had been Nora's assistant for a year and a half. He had never seen her white in the face like this. "What is it?" he said. "Nora, what is it? Coyotes! Somebody in the lot." She shook her head. She did not know what it was. She only knew that Copper, the old bloodhound in Kennel 9, was throwing his whole body against his gate over and over, his big loose lips pulled back, whining a broken little whine down in his chest that did not belong in a dog his size. Copper had come to her 4 years ago, half-starved off a hunt trail up in the hollows. His owner had died, and nobody wanted a bloodhound with white on his muzzle. Nora had never been able to place him and had stopped trying. He was hers now. He slept in the office on a folded quilt at night and rode in her passenger seat during the day and did not, as a rule, throw himself against gates. She walked to Kennel 9 and unlatched the run. The bloodhound did not stop to greet her. He did not lick her hand. He went past her at a heavy, determined trot, straight through the middle of the room, straight to the back door, and he began scratching at the metal until his nails left long, pale streaks in the grey paint. "Open it," she said to Toby. Her voice did not sound like her voice. He put down the rifle. He turned the deadbolt. Copper burst out into the field like something had thrown him. The other dogs quieted the second that door swung open. They stood at the fronts of their runs, ears forward, watching the dark rectangle of the doorway. Waiting. Nora and Toby went after him. The grass was crunching underfoot with frost. Her breath came out in white bursts. She had not stopped to put on a coat, and the cold slid up under her sweatshirt and dug into the small of her back. The bloodhound was 50 yards ahead of them already, a low-moving shadow against the pale field, and his big, loose voice was starting to bell now, the way a hound bells when he has the scent. They followed him across 200 yards of stubble. The moon was down. The stars looked hard and close and did not offer any warmth. Nora's flashlight bounced ahead of her feet and picked out the frozen tire tracks of the tractor that had cut this field 3 months ago. Copper stopped near the tree line where the field dipped into a shallow ditch. He sat. He did not sit like a dog waiting for a treat. He sat like a soldier at a grave. He would not move. Nora came up beside him and put a hand on his shoulder. She could feel him shaking under the coat. That was when the beam of her flashlight passed over something small and pink in the frozen weeds beside the ditch. A sneaker. A child's sneaker. She heard herself say, "Oh God," out loud without meaning to. She swept the light down the slope of the ditch, and the beam found the curl of a little back in a puffy purple coat. And the coat was moving in tiny, shallow shudders, and there was a small, pale hand in the frost, with the fingers half closed, as if she had been trying to hold on to the last bit of warmth in her own body. Nora went down the slope on her side. The little girl was breathing, just barely. Her lips were the color of old bruises, and her eyelashes had frost on them, and there was a smear of blood dried under her nose from where she must have fallen at some point in the dark. She had lost the other sneaker. Her sock had a picture of a rabbit on it. Nora had already pulled off her sweatshirt and was easing it around the child before her mind could catch up to what her hands were doing. Toby came sliding down after her. "Call the sheriff," Nora said. "Then run and get the truck around. Don't try to move her yet. Keep the engine on high heat. Blankets, whatever's in the back seat. Go." Toby was already gone. She whispered nonsense words to the little girl. The kind of words you say to any small, trembling thing. "Baby, it's okay. I'm right here. You're safe now, sweetheart. You're safe now. It's all right." The little girl did not open her eyes, but her fingers, when Nora took the small hand between hers, closed slowly around Nora's thumb. Just barely. Just enough. Copper had not moved from the lip of the ditch. He sat with his enormous head lowered and his ears drooping, and his tail was not wagging, but he stayed. He stayed the whole time until the headlights of Nora's old pickup came bumping across the field. Sheriff Bo Hendricks met them at the county hospital 40 minutes later. Bo was a big square man in a grey uniform who had been sheriff long enough to have grandchildren by the 2 deputies he had hired first. He walked into the emergency waiting room with his hat in his hand and his mouth set, the way men set their mouths when they have prepared to tell a family the worst news of their lives. Nora saw his face, and she stood up too fast and got dizzy. "She's alive," she said. "They think she'll keep all her fingers and toes. Doctor said another 20 minutes and—" She could not finish the sentence. Bo closed his eyes for a second, and when he opened them, there was a shine at the corners that he did not try to hide. He sat down on the plastic chair next to hers. "That was Lila Weston," he said. "I know. She's been gone since supper time yesterday. We had every lantern in the county out from the Coleman farm, clear to the Ridge Road. Never even thought to look on your side of the highway. Kid couldn't have crossed the creek. Nobody could in the dark at 9 years old. But she did. But she did." They sat quietly for a minute. The overhead light hummed. A vending machine down the hall made a small mechanical sigh. "Nora," Bo said, "what told you to go out there?" She thought about it. She thought about the sound the dogs had made. She thought about Copper throwing himself at the gate. She did not know how to say any of it in a way that would not sound crazy in the front page of the county paper. "They knew," she said finally. "Every dog in that building knew, all at once. I don't know how." Bo turned his hat around and around in his big hands. "That's the 3rd time in 8 years I've had a dog find a child in this county," he said. "And every time it happens, some smart person on the internet tells me it's just a coincidence." Nora almost laughed. It came out wet. The doctor came out. Lila's parents were on their way in from the farmhouse. She would need to stay for observation and warming, but she would go home in the morning, awake, alert, no permanent damage. The doctor used the word miracle without seeming to notice he had said it. Nora sat in the waiting room in a borrowed hospital sweatshirt that said Ashfield Regional in big fading letters, and she watched a slow grey dawn come up through the window over the parking lot, and she could not stop thinking about the sound the dogs had made. One voice from 40 throats pointed at the same dark field. Something had put that sound in them. Something had told a 9-year-old girl in the middle of the night, 3 miles from her own front door, to lay down in a ditch on the far side of a creek she should not have been able to cross. And something had put a small pink sneaker in the weeds where her flashlight would find it. That was the part she could not put down. The dogs had known. But the dogs did not do all of that. Somebody else had known too. At sunrise, she drove back to the shelter, and she opened every kennel, and she sat down on the concrete floor in the middle of them. She had thought they might mob her. Instead, they came quiet. Copper came first and put his heavy head in her lap and gave one long sigh through his loose black lips. The others pressed in around her, warm, breathing, silent. She stayed there until the light through the high windows turned from grey to gold. By 8 o'clock, the parking lot outside was full of trucks. The whole county already knew. By 10, it was on the local news, and by the time Nora had gotten the last dog fed and watered and back into a run, her office phone had rung 27 times, reporters mostly, and people wanting to donate, and 2 women who had lost pets in the last few years and just wanted to tell her that she was a good person in voices that broke halfway through. Toby handled most of the phone. He had a way with the phone that Nora did not have. He was very young and very earnest, and he thanked people the way a person thanks somebody who has just held a door open for them. At noon, Bo Hendricks pulled his cruiser into the lot. He came into the office with 2 coffees in a cardboard tray and sat down across from her without asking. "Doctor says she's ready to talk," Bo said. "The parents are asking that you come over. Lila won't sleep unless you're there." Nora had never met Lila Weston in her life. She said this out loud. "Well," Bo said, "she sure knows you now." The Weston farmhouse sat at the end of a long unpaved lane 3 miles east of the shelter, past the abandoned feed store and up the hill where the county line cut across a stand of hickory. It was a low white house with a wraparound porch and a swing that had been painted 7 different colors over its life. There was a barn behind it that had once held dairy cows and now held a tractor and some hay. And there was a small red pickup truck parked half up on the grass beside a beat-up sedan that Nora did not recognize. Lila's mother, Rachel Weston, met them at the door before they could knock. Rachel was 34 years old and looked 44 this morning. Her eyes were swollen almost shut from crying, and her hair was pulled back in a hasty ponytail, and she was still wearing yesterday's clothes. She flung her arms around Nora without a word and held on for a long time. "Thank you," Rachel whispered. "Thank you, thank you, thank you. Oh God, thank you." Nora patted the woman's back the way you pat any small, trembling thing. Rachel led her through a hallway that smelled of coffee and wet coats, and up a flight of narrow wooden stairs. The door to Lila's room was propped open with a rag doll. Inside, the little girl was sitting up in a bed with pink sheets, her small hands wrapped around a mug of cocoa. Both hands still had 10 fingers, and Nora only realized she'd been holding her breath about that when it came out of her in a rush. Lila looked up when Nora came into the room, and her whole small face did something that was not quite a smile. It was more like recognition, like she had been waiting for a particular person to walk through that door, and now that particular person had arrived. "You," she said in a small, hoarse voice, "you had the flashlight." "That was me, honey," Nora said. Lila reached out one hand. Nora sat down on the edge of the bed and took it. "Where is he?" Lila said. Nora blinked. "Where is who, sweetheart?" "The dog, the big one with the long ears. He came down." "That was Copper. He's back home. He's just fine. He led me to you." "No," Lila said. Her small hand tightened on Nora's. "Not that one. The other one. The one before." The room got very quiet. Rachel Weston, standing in the doorway with her arms folded across her stomach, had gone still. Nora looked at Lila carefully. "Sweetheart, was there another dog with you in the field?" Lila nodded, solemnly. "He walked me across the water," she whispered. "The water was really cold. He didn't like the water either, but he walked out first, and then I could see where the rocks were." Bo Hendricks, who had come up the stairs behind them, gently pushed the door a little wider. "Baby girl," he said, in a voice softer than his uniform. "Can you tell Sheriff Bo what the other dog looked like?" Lila thought about it. "Brown," she said, "and white, on his chest. He had a bent ear, this one. She touched her own left ear. It went sideways. Nora felt every hair on her arm stand up at once. Rachel Weston made a small strangled noise in the doorway. "Rachel?" Bo said. Rachel did not answer. She had one hand up over her mouth, and her eyes were fixed on her daughter, and she looked like a woman who had just heard a voice from a room she had locked years ago. Nora looked from Rachel to Lila and back again. Something was happening in this house that she did not understand. She kept her voice gentle. "Lila, honey, do you know that dog?" "He was ours," Lila whispered. "Bear was ours. Before." "Before what?" Bo asked, still gently. Lila did not answer that. She turned her face into her mother's arm when Rachel came and sat down on the other side of the bed. She would not say anything else about the dog for a while. But she did say one other thing before she fell asleep with her small hand still holding on to Nora's fingers. She said, without opening her eyes, in a voice that was barely a breath, "He told me to run." Nora looked up. Bo had heard it too. So had Rachel. All three grown-up faces were pointed at the sleeping child. "Lila, honey," Nora said very softly, "who told you to run?" Lila did not answer. She was already asleep. Rachel Weston stood up very fast. She went to the window and stood with her back to them, and she began to cry without any sound at all. Bo took Nora by the elbow and steered her back into the hall. Downstairs, in the kitchen, they found a man they had not seen when they came in. He was standing at the sink with his back to them, rinsing out a coffee cup. When he turned around, Nora saw a tall, lean man in his early 40s with a red beard, trimmed close, and blue eyes that took her measure in one long, unhurried look and did not blink. "Sheriff," he said, nodding. "Rusty," Bo said. His voice had gone flat. "This is my brother-in-law," Rachel said from behind them. Her voice was steady in a way that seemed to cost her something. "Rusty Weston. He's been staying with us the last few weeks. Between jobs." "Hi," said Rusty, holding out a hand. Nora shook it because you shake a hand when it is offered. It was warm and dry and firm and did not want to let go. "You're the one who found her?" he said. "I owe you a beer." "That's not necessary." "It's necessary," Rusty said, still holding on. He smiled with only the bottom half of his face. His eyes did not smile. He let go of her hand. She had to make herself not wipe it on her jeans. Bo said in a very neutral voice, "Rusty, mind stepping outside with me for a second?" "About what?" "About where you were last night." Rusty smiled. This time the top half of his face joined in. It made him look like he had just heard a good joke. "Bo, come on. I was on the couch watching the search from the living room window. Rachel was here. Cy was here." He gestured to a boy of maybe 14 who had just come slouching in from the back porch, a hoodie pulled up over his head. "We were all here, waiting on the phone." "That true, Cyrus?" Bo said, turning to the boy. The boy shrugged. He did not meet the sheriff's eyes. "I guess," he said. "You guess." "Yeah?" Bo looked at the boy for another moment, then at Rusty, then at Rachel, who was standing very still by the counter with her hands clasped so hard that the knuckles had gone white. "All right," Bo said finally. "Rusty, I'm going to need you to come down to the station later today just to give a statement. Standard thing. Wanderer case." "Sure, Bo. Anything for that girl." Rusty had gone back to the sink. Bo put a hand between Nora's shoulder blades and walked her out to the porch. He did not say a word until they were down the steps and standing beside his cruiser. "You saw that boy's face," he said quietly. Nora nodded. "That was a scared kid," Bo said. "That was a scared kid," Nora agreed. "Nora." Bo glanced back at the house. Then he looked at her, and she saw something in his eyes that had not been there in the waiting room at the hospital. Something older and colder and sadder. "I have known Rusty Weston since we were both 8 years old," Bo said. He has walked into my station 4 times in the last 12 years on complaints from mothers of young girls. He has never once been charged. Every complaint has been withdrawn. Nora felt the cold of the field come back into her spine. Withdrawn how? Every kind of way you can imagine, Bo said. Money, fear, a restraining order the mother couldn't afford to keep chasing. One family moved out of state. One girl refused to testify. One deputy at the time was Rusty's cousin, and he lost the paperwork twice. Bo shook his head. The Westons are a big family in this county, and Rusty is careful. He is very, very careful, and I have never been able to lay a finger on him. Nora's throat had gone dry. You think he did something to Lila? I think Lila ran 3 miles in the dark, in the freezing cold, and walked across a creek she should not have been able to cross. That's not a kid wandering off. That's a kid running for her life. And I think she told you who she was running from without knowing that was what she was telling you. He turned and put his hat on. And I think, Bo said, and now his voice had that same low bell of the hound in it, that if we don't move fast, Rusty Weston is going to be gone by tomorrow morning. He got in the cruiser and pulled his radio off the dash. Nora stood in the drive for a long moment. From the house, she could hear the faint sound of a woman crying behind a closed window. She drove back to the shelter feeling very old. Toby was waiting for her in the parking lot when she pulled in. He was pacing next to the front door in that stiff-shouldered way he paced when something was wrong that he didn't know how to say. Nora, he said before she was even out of the truck, you need to come around back. She followed him around the side of the building, past the chain-link runs, to the small, gravelled area that led out into the same field she had crossed in the dark hours ago. And there, at the edge of the tree line, where the field met the tangle of scrub oak, a dog was sitting, watching them. It was a medium-sized dog, brown with a white blaze up its chest, and its left ear was bent sideways, bent the way an ear bends when a much younger dog gets in a scrap and the cartilage folds and never comes back. Nora stopped walking. He's been out there for maybe an hour, Toby said. Hasn't moved, hasn't come closer, hasn't run off. I put a bowl of kibble out at the fence. He won't come to it. Nora took one slow step forward. The dog watched her. His head was low, his tail was still. He looked at her the way a dog looks who has already been sent away once and does not intend to be sent away twice. She crouched down in the grass. She did not reach out. She did not click her tongue or hold out her hand. She just sat back on her heels and looked at him with soft eyes. And after a long minute of that, she said, in a voice as gentle as any voice she had ever used on any dog in her life, "Bear." His ears came up. She said it again. "Bear, come here, buddy." He got up. He walked out of the trees. He walked across the frost-white grass in that slow, tentative way that thin dogs walk when they are pretending not to be starving. He came to the fence and stopped. Nora slid her fingers through the wire. He pushed his cold nose against them. He was shaking. "Oh, honey," she whispered, "you've been out here a long time, haven't you?" Toby had knelt down beside her. "You know this dog." "I know this dog," she said. "I adopted this dog out 4 years ago to a family named Weston." Toby's face did something. "Nora," he said. His voice had gone a little strange. "Nora, I have to tell you something." She looked at him. "I know that family," Toby said. "I mean, I know Rusty. He was my mum's boyfriend for 2 years when I was 13 and 14. He lived in our house." Nora looked at him. Really looked at him. She had known Toby Marlowe for 1.5 years. She had known his mother had died the summer before he came to work for her, of the kind of cancer that takes you fast. She had known Toby lived alone in a rented room over the hardware store on Main. She had not known any of this before. "Toby," she said. He nodded. He was not looking at her. He was looking at Bear through the fence. "He's the reason I moved out at 15. I told my mum what he was, and she believed me and she put him out. He came back through the window one night looking for me. I went out the other window and I never went back until she was in the hospital. I never testified. I never told anyone. I thought when my mom died it was over. I thought he was gone. Then I heard he was up here staying with his brother's family, and I didn't say anything. I told myself he wouldn't. I told myself Rachel would see it. I told myself. He stopped. He put both hands flat against the chain link. Nora. I should have said something. I should have said something the day he moved into that house. Lila almost died last night because I didn't say anything. Nora reached over and put her hand on the back of his neck, the way you steady a horse. Toby, she said, listen to me. Listen, that was not on you. You were a kid. You are still barely not a kid. You are not the one who did this. He is. But if I'd... You didn't know she was in that house. You didn't. She turned her face back to Bear on the other side of the fence. The dog was still shaking. Come on, she said. Come on, buddy. Come on home. She led him around to the side gate. He came the whole way with his head down and his tail down, and he flinched at every gate that clanged. But he came. When she opened the door of the shelter, he stopped at the threshold and stared at Copper, who had come padding up from the office at the sound of her voice. The two dogs stared at each other for a long moment across 10 feet of concrete. Then the old bloodhound walked forward, one heavy step at a time, and pushed his big head against Bear's shoulder in the greeting dogs use when one is telling the other that this is safe now, this is a place, this is enough. Bear let out a long breath. He lay down on the concrete floor. He was home. By the middle of the afternoon, Bo Hendricks had a warrant. Not for arrest yet, just to search the property. He came out of the Western place at 4 in the afternoon with Rusty's phone and Rusty's laptop and Rusty's truck impounded, and a warrant on his belt that also let him take the shirt Rusty had been wearing the night before. Rusty had watched all of this from the porch, with his arms crossed and his easy half-smile on the bottom of his face, and he had said, in a voice pitched loud enough for the neighbors to hear, "You're going to look like a fool, Bo. This kid's got an imagination. She's going to make you look like a fool." Bo had not answered. Rachel Weston had not come out on the porch. Lila's older brother, Cyrus, had stood in the doorway looking at the deputies loading up his uncle's truck and had turned around and walked back into the house without a word. At 6 o'clock, the story about the shelter dogs was on the evening news out of Kansas City. By 8, it had been picked up by a Sunday morning program that would run it nationally. By 10, Nora had 38 voicemails, most of them from people offering to donate, and 3 of them from the Ashfield County Commissioner's office. The last one was from the commissioner himself. His name was Wallace Ford. He had held that seat for 16 years. He was Rusty Weston's second cousin on his mother's side. The message said, "Miss Fielding, this is Wallace Ford. I'd appreciate a call back at your earliest convenience regarding some recent complaints about the operation of the shelter." The recording clicked off. Nora put the phone down on the counter and stared at it. Toby, on the other side of the counter, said, "Complaints about what?" "Well," Nora said, "that's the question, isn't it?" She did not sleep that night. She lay on her cot behind the office and she listened to Bear, breathing in the dark on the folded quilt that had been Copper's. Copper was on the floor beside her, snoring the small, wet snore of a bloodhound. Every now and then, a dog somewhere in the runs would sigh, or a chain would rattle softly, and then the building would go back to quiet. At 3:30 in the morning, she heard a car turn slowly into the parking lot. She got up. She did not turn on the light. She went to the front window and looked out. It was a red pickup truck. It was Rusty Weston's red pickup truck, the one that had been impounded that afternoon. Except it hadn't been. Someone had signed it out. Someone had put it back in Rusty's hands. The truck idled in the middle of the lot for a long time. Its headlights were on the front door of the shelter. Nora could not see the driver through the glare. Then the truck reversed slowly, all the way to the end of the lot, and sat again, still with the headlights on the door. Nora stepped back from the window. Every dog in the building came awake at once. But they did not howl, they growled. 40 throats, one low, sustained sound. It came out of the walls the way a swarm of bees comes out of a hollow log. It filled the office. It filled the space between Nora's ribs and her lungs. The headlights outside cut off. The truck pulled out of the lot. Nora heard it go up the road, slow, unhurried, until the sound of it faded away over the ridge. She stood in the dark, with her heart hammering. She picked up her phone. She called Bo Hendricks. He answered on the first ring because it was 3:30 in the morning and he was a sheriff, and his phone did not ring at 3:30 in the morning for any good reason. "He was here," Nora said. Bo was quiet for 2 seconds. "Nora, that truck is in my impound lot. I locked the gate myself at 5 o'clock. Then somebody unlocked it. I just watched it pull out of my parking lot with him behind the wheel." Bo said a word he did not usually say. "Stay inside," he said. "Lock everything. I'm on my way." He was there in 11 minutes. By then the truck was back in the county impound lot, parked exactly where Bo had left it, engine cold. The gate was locked. Bo's own key opened it. Nobody had signed anything out. The night deputy, a man named Marvin, who had been on the county payroll for 19 years, swore up and down he had not heard a thing. He looked at Bo in a way Bo had never seen him look before. He looked at Bo the way a man looks who has taken money and is thinking about how much money it was. Bo did not fire him that night. He sent him home. And then he stood in the parking lot of the shelter at 4 in the morning under the sodium yellow of the pole light with Nora in her coat and said, "He's telling us he can walk through walls. He's telling me he can come in here whenever he wants. He's telling both of us," Bo said, "that the Western name still means what it always meant in this county." Nora looked past him at the shelter. The lights were off. Inside, 40 dogs were still awake, standing in their runs, watching the parking lot through the wire. "Then I guess we better make it not mean that anymore," she said. Bo Hendricks had a plan by sunrise, and it was not the plan he had gone to bed with. He had gone to bed thinking he would build a case slowly, quietly, with a forensic pull on Rusty's laptop and a psychologist's interview with Lila and a subpoena for the shelter security footage from earlier in the week to place Rusty's truck on the road that led toward the tree line. He had woken up thinking that Rusty had already understood all of that and had already begun the game of showing him just how many pieces of the county board Rusty was allowed to move. So Bo changed plans. He put deputies he trusted on the shelter, one at a time, in shifts, in unmarked cars. He asked the state highway patrol as a personal favor to keep an eye on the county road that ran past the impound lot, and he pulled the security cameras in the impound himself and drove the drive to the tech lab in the county seat with it on the seat beside him, and did not let it out of his sight until it was in the hands of a state technician who did not know anybody in Ashfield County. He filed a motion quietly through a friend at the district court in the next county over for an emergency protective order for Lila Weston that named Rusty Weston by name, and he had it signed within 4 hours. He served it personally at the farmhouse at 10 in the morning, and he stood on the porch and read it out loud in Rachel Weston's kitchen while Rusty leaned against the counter with his coffee and the same easy half-smile. Rusty said, "This is a joke." Bo said, "It's got a judge's signature on it, Rusty. It ain't a joke." Rachel Weston did not look at her brother-in-law. She looked at her older son, Cyrus, who was sitting at the kitchen table with a cereal spoon halfway to his mouth. She looked at him for a long time. She looked at him with an expression that was of a mother deciding something very late that she should have decided very early. Rachel Weston stood up. She said, "Rusty, go pack your things." Rusty looked at her. "Rachel, pack them," she said. "Sis, pack them or I will pack them for you and put them out in the driveway. Go." The kitchen was silent for a long moment. Then Rusty put down his coffee cup very carefully in the exact center of the coaster on the counter. He smiled at his sister-in-law. It was the kind of smile that made Bo put his hand a little closer to the grip of his service weapon. "All right, sis," Rusty said, in a voice light enough to carry to the porch. "All right, if that's how you want it." He walked past her up the stairs. Bo followed him up. Rachel stayed in the kitchen with her hand pressed to her chest, breathing shallow, like a woman who had just leapt off a bridge and did not know yet if the water below was deep enough. Cyrus, still at the table, said, in a voice that had barely broken, "Mama." Rachel turned. "Yeah, baby. I saw him." She waited. "I saw him," Cyrus said again. "2 nights ago, he went into her room. I heard her crying. He said if I ever told, he would say I did it. He said everybody would believe him because he was a grown man and I was 14. Rachel Weston made a small sound. She sat down on the floor of the kitchen where she had been standing, all in a heap, as if her legs had simply forgotten their job. She said, Baby, why didn't you?" Cyrus's face was streaming. "Because he said," he said. "Because he said." Rachel crawled across her own kitchen floor and grabbed her son and held him. Bo Hendricks came down the stairs with Rusty Weston in front of him, and Rusty Weston's hands behind his back in a pair of cuffs, and Rusty Weston no longer smiling at all. He looked at the mother and the son on the kitchen floor. He looked at the sheriff. He said, "Bo, this isn't going to hold. This is going to fall apart. You know that. Everybody in this town knows what my family is." Bo said, "That may be, Rusty. But this morning your nephew told me you did to his sister what you did to that boy in Warrensburg in '98. And that boy grew up. And that boy came and told me, too. And I got a warrant on my desk about him, too." Rusty stopped smiling completely then. Nora heard about it from Bo over the phone at 11:15 that morning. She was sitting in her office with a stack of paper on the desk in front of her that had been faxed over by the county commissioner's office at 7, and she was reading through it for the 4th time, and each time she read it, it made less sense than it had made the time before. The paper said that the Ashfield County Board of Commissioners had received a number of anonymous complaints regarding the operation of the county animal shelter. It said that after preliminary review, the board found probable cause to convene an emergency session on the matter to be held that Thursday evening at 7 o'clock in the county courthouse in Ridge. It said the possible outcomes of this session included, and this was the phrase that had put a cold hand on Nora Fielding's chest, the immediate suspension of the shelter's operating charter pending a full audit, and the removal of Miss Fielding from her position as director. The complaints, the paper said, related to animal welfare violations, financial irregularities, and, quote, conduct unbecoming, end quote, a county employee. Nora had not received a paycheck from the county in 11 years without earning it. She had put more of her own money into that building than she had ever put into her own truck. She had a filing cabinet full of vet receipts and adoption papers, and every donation ever made, tracked to the dollar. The paper did not care about any of that. The paper said the meeting was in 3 days. She was still staring at it when the phone rang. "Rusty's in a cell," Bo said. "He's not making bond today." Nora exhaled a breath she had not known she was holding. "There's a wrinkle," Bo said. "There always is. Wallace Ford just left my office." Nora closed her eyes. "He said he had been in contact with Rusty's attorney. He said Rusty's attorney had raised some concerns about a certain county employee involving herself in what should be a police matter. He said he thought maybe the timing of this shelter review was, quote, unfortunate, end quote, but the paperwork was already in motion, and it would be difficult to stop it now without appearing to interfere in ongoing oversight. He said all of this," Bo said, "very slowly in the middle of my station while my deputies were watching. He wanted them to hear it. He wanted them to hear it." Nora rubbed her face with both hands. "Bo, what do I do? You show up Thursday night with every friend you have ever made in this county," Bo said. "And I mean every one. And you make sure the whole county knows why they are going after you. Because right now, Wallace Ford thinks he can quietly cut you off at the knees while everybody is looking at Rusty. Don't let him do it quietly. Don't let him do it in a room with 15 people in it. Fill the room. Bo, I don't have that kind of pull. Nora. Bo's voice was quiet. You pulled a 9-year-old girl out of a ditch 2 nights ago, in this county. In this county, that gives you all the pull in the world. You just have to be willing to use it. He hung up. Nora sat in her chair for a long time. Toby came in and looked at her without saying anything and set a cup of coffee on the corner of her desk and went out again. Bear was lying beside her chair. He had not left her side since the middle of the night. She reached down and put a hand on the top of his head, and he rolled his eyes up to look at her with the pale amber irises of a dog who has been told to leave and does not intend to leave one more time. She said, "All right, buddy, all right." She picked up the phone. She started calling. The first call was to Marla Deacon, who ran the diner on 5th. Marla Deacon was 71 years old and had voted in every county election since Eisenhower, and knew every soul in Ashfield by the way they took their eggs. Marla listened to Nora for 4 minutes without saying a word. When Nora was done, Marla said, "Thursday, you said." "Thursday, 7 o'clock. Honey," Marla said, "you go to bed early Wednesday because I'm going to fill that courthouse for you if I have to close the diner and drive people over there in my own car." The second call was to Pastor Elias Jennings at the First Methodist. Pastor Jennings had married 3 generations of Fieldings and had also, 6 years ago, come to the shelter looking for a cat because his wife was going through her chemotherapy and needed something small and warm on her lap. That cat, whose name was Missy Gray, had outlived Mrs. Jennings by 4 years now, and the pastor had never come into the shelter since then without leaving $50 in the donation jar on his way out. Pastor Jennings listened. Pastor Jennings said, "Thursday. I'll speak on it Sunday." "That won't be in time, Pastor." "Girl," said Pastor Jennings, "I'll speak on it today from the sidewalk if I have to. I got a phone tree. I'll get them there." The third call was to Delia Ortega, the volunteer coordinator who had helped Nora walk dogs on Saturday mornings for the last 4 years. Delia was 31 and worked as a paralegal at the small law firm on Main and had 2 children in the county elementary school. Delia said in a voice as steady as a fence post, "I'll get the mothers. Every mother in that PTA who ever adopted a kitten from you or brought her kid to the summer reading day. Every one of them. You just say when and where." Nora made calls for 4 hours. She had not known, until she made those calls, how many people in the county considered her something more than just the lady who ran the pound out by the county line. By the time the sun was going down, she had spoken to 112 people. The last one was the editor of the small Ashfield weekly newspaper, a man named Perry Kling, and Perry Kling said, "I've got a front page already for Wednesday morning. It's about that girl and your dogs. Now you tell me about the commissioner and I'll add a second page," she told him. He listened. He said, "Miss Fielding, I have been reporting on Wallace Ford for 22 years. I have wanted a piece of paper like this in my hands for 20 of those years. Thank you." By dark, all 40 dogs in the shelter had been fed and watered and turned in, and Nora Fielding was lying on her cot in the office, with Copper on the floor on one side of her, and Bear on the folded quilt on the other, and she was more tired than she had ever been in her life, and for the first time all day she thought that maybe she was not going to lose. She woke at 2 in the morning to the sound of glass breaking. It came from the front office, not from the runs. She was on her feet before her mind had caught up to it. Copper was on his feet too. Bear was already at the office door, growling low and hard, that same swarming sound from 40 throats compressed into one throat. Nora grabbed the flashlight and the softball bat she kept behind the desk. She went out into the hallway. Copper went in front of her. Bear did not leave her heel. The front office window was broken. Somebody had thrown a cinder block through it. The block was sitting in the middle of the floor on top of a spray of pale green safety glass. There was a folded piece of paper tied to it with a bit of baling wire. The paper said, in block capital letters, in a hand that was trying very hard to look like it wasn't Rusty Weston's hand, "Drop it or every dog in this building burns." Nora stood in her office in her pajamas with a softball bat in one hand and the note in the other, and she did not cry, and she did not scream, and she did not call the sheriff. She sat down in her desk chair. She put the note on the desk. She thought about it for a long moment. Then she picked up her phone and she called Perry Kling at the Ashfield Weekly. And she said, "Perry, bring your camera. Bring it right now." He came in his bathrobe. By 6 in the morning, the photograph of that note on Nora Fielding's desk, with the cinder block beside it, was on the front page of a special edition of the Ashfield Weekly. Under it was a headline in the biggest type Perry Kling had ever used in his life. "Who is afraid of this woman and her dogs?" By 9 in the morning, the story had been picked up by every county paper within 100 miles. By noon, the state paper out of Kansas City had a reporter driving down. By 4 in the afternoon, a national morning show had called Nora's office 3 times and offered to send a truck. Nora did not take the calls from the truck. She was too busy sweeping up glass and boarding up the window with a piece of plywood Toby had brought over in the back of his little sedan. At 5 o'clock, Wallace Ford's chief of staff called the shelter. He said, in a voice like somebody trying to swallow a marble, that the county commission had reviewed the file and had decided to postpone the emergency meeting indefinitely, and that the county would like to formally thank Miss Fielding for her tireless service, and that the county might be interested in discussing a new operating agreement that would include, quote, "a significant increase in the annual budget," end quote, once the current investigation into the Western matter had concluded. Nora listened to all of it. She said, "Please tell Commissioner Ford that if the meeting is held on Thursday as scheduled, I will be there, and every person who is coming with me will be there, and we will have that conversation in public. If the meeting is postponed, I will call the reporters at the station and tell them why. My choice, sir, not yours." The chief of staff on the other end of the line made a small strangled sound. "I'll pass that along," he said. She hung up. She stood at the boarded window and looked at the parking lot. There were 22 cars in it, volunteers she had not called, neighbors she had not asked, old adopters who had driven in from 3 towns over, a woman named Betty who had brought 2 folding tables and a coffee pot, 2 men from the volunteer fire department in their yellow slickers, Pastor Jennings sitting on the tailgate of his truck with his arms folded and a shotgun across his knees. He had never in his life fired a shotgun. Nora watched them for a long time. She said quietly, to nobody, all right, we'll do it." The commission meeting was on Thursday at 7 in the courthouse in Ridge, and Bo Hendricks had estimated in his own head that they might get 80 people through the doors. 312 people came. They filled the courthouse, they filled the hallways, they filled the front steps and the sidewalk and the parking lot across the street. Somebody had brought a folding chair for Marla Deacon, who was 71 and had walked with a cane since her hip replacement, and Marla had refused it and stood in the front row with her cane, like a rifle in her hand. Pastor Jennings had brought his whole choir. Delia Ortega had brought every mother from the PTA and every one of their husbands and about half of their teenagers. Perry Kling had brought a camera and a notebook and had put himself in the front row on the aisle. Wallace Ford came into the room at 5 minutes past 7 with the other 4 commissioners behind him, and he saw the room. And Nora Fielding sitting in the second row with Toby Marlowe on one side of her and Bo Hendricks on the other, watched the moment Wallace Ford understood that his career was about to end in front of 312 people and a newspaper reporter. He tried to open the meeting anyway. He got as far as the words, "Good evening." Marla Deacon rapped her cane once on the wooden floor of the courthouse, and the sound went through the room like a hammer. "Wallace," she said, in a voice you could hear all the way to the back wall. "Wallace Ford, you are going to tell this room right now why you tried to shut down the woman who saved that little girl." The room did not applaud. The room did not shout. The room got very, very quiet. Wallace Ford stared at Marla Deacon for a long moment. He opened his mouth. He closed it. Then he did something Nora had not expected. He put down his gavel. He sat down. He looked at his hands. He said, "Mrs. Deacon, it was a mistake. It was a favor I should not have done for family, and I am sorry." The room did applaud then, not politely. It roared. Wallace Ford did not run for re-election in the fall. Rusty Weston did not walk out of the county jail. The state came in on the case within a week. The old file from Warrensburg came out of a dusty box and was joined by 2 new files from 2 other counties, where 2 other young women had, on hearing the news, called a state hotline. Rusty was arraigned on 9 counts. Cyrus Weston testified from behind a screen. Lila Weston, who had turned 10 by then, testified in an empty courtroom to a judge and a stenographer, with her mother holding her one hand and Nora Fielding holding the other. She spoke for 18 minutes. She did not cry. She said what happened, and she said what had made her run, and she said what Bear had done in the woods. When the judge asked her at the end if there was anything else she wanted to say, Lila thought about it for a long moment. She said, "The dogs knew, all of them, all at once. I want them to know I heard them." The judge, whose name was Marion Beltram and who had been on the bench for 29 years, took off his glasses and set them on the bench in front of him and did not say anything for a while. Then he said, "Miss Weston, you have my word." Rusty Weston was sentenced in the spring to 32 years in the state penitentiary. He served every day of it. He never came back to Ashfield County. But the story did not end there for Nora Fielding. And it did not end there for the little pack that had sung one voice through the cinder-block walls of the Ashfield County shelter at 4 in the morning. It could not end there, because there was still the question of Bear. Because Bear had not been in a Western kennel in the years since Nora had adopted him out, Bear had been running loose somewhere in this county for a long time, and Bear had come out of the trees on the night that little girl had needed him, and Bear had walked her across a creek Bear did not want to cross, and Bear had known where to go. Nora needed to know where Bear had come from. She thought about it the way a person thinks about a stone in a shoe. She thought about it while she fed him, and while she brushed the winter mats out of his coat, and while she watched him lay his head on Copper's back like a boy leaning on an older brother. She started asking around. The answer took her 3 weeks to piece together, and it was not the answer she had expected, and it was the answer that changed the shelter forever. She started at the Western farmhouse, because that was where Bear had lived after her. She sat in Rachel Weston's kitchen with a cup of coffee that had gone cold in her hands, and she asked Rachel about the dog. Rachel had aged 10 years in a month, but she was steadier now than Nora had ever seen her. She sat with both hands wrapped around her mug, and she told Nora what she knew. "We had him 3 years," Rachel said. "He was Lila's dog from the day we brought him home. He slept at the foot of her bed. He would not let anybody stand between him and the door of her room, not even me." She stopped and swallowed. "Rusty came to stay with us that first time 3 summers ago. Bear didn't like him. Bear didn't like anybody who came near Lila, but with Rusty it was different. Bear would put himself between Rusty and Lila every single time. He wouldn't let Rusty in her room. He wouldn't let Rusty near her chair at the table. He growled once, just once. It was low. It was quiet. And Rusty," she stopped again. "Rusty said Bear was going to bite somebody. He said he'd take him to a shelter. He said he knew a place. I was too tired. I let him take my daughter's dog. He came back an hour later without him. He said it was done. He said Bear had a good chance because he was young. I don't know if I believed him. I don't know if I let myself think about it. Nora took a slow breath. He didn't take Bear to a shelter, she said. No, Rachel said. She was looking at her hands. I thought so. I never said so out loud. Not for 3 years. I never said. Where did he take him? I don't know. But he came back down the North Road, and that road only goes 2 places. It goes to the highway, and it goes past the old sawmill. Nora went to the old sawmill. The old sawmill was 5 miles up the county road, at the end of a dirt track that went off the pavement into a stand of pine that had once been a working operation, and now was 3 collapsed sheds and a rusted saw blade the size of a dining room table sunk halfway into the ground. Nobody lived there. Nobody had lived there in 12 years. But there was a family that had bought the land in the last few years, and they lived a mile further up the road at a small farm called Willow Bend, and their names were the Petersons, and Nora had adopted a dog out to their oldest daughter the summer before. She drove up to Willow Bend on a Saturday afternoon in April with Bear in the passenger seat. She had brought Bear along because Bear had wanted to come. Bear had put his front paws on her knee that morning and had looked at her with those pale amber eyes and had made the small chuffing sound in his throat that dogs make when they want to be understood. And she had opened the passenger door and said, "All right, buddy, all right." Aggie Peterson was in the barnyard when Nora pulled in. Aggie was 10 years old, freckled, with a braid down her back, and she was in the middle of teaching a small tan puppy to sit on the tailgate of a truck. When she saw Nora, she waved. When she saw Bear stepping down out of the passenger seat, she stopped moving. She said, "Mama, Mama, come out here." Aggie's mother, Karen Peterson, came out of the house, wiping her hands on a dish towel. She looked at Nora. She looked at Bear. She said, "Oh." Nora waited. Karen Peterson said, "That's the dog we found." Nora nodded slowly. 4 winters ago, Karen said, right around Christmas. He came up out of the woods behind the sawmill. He was so skinny you could count his ribs. Somebody had left him with a length of old rope around his neck. It had grown into the skin. We had to work it out real slow with a warm cloth. He would not let anyone near him for a week. Nora's eyes stung. Bear was sitting against her leg. She put her hand on the top of his head. "He stayed with us all winter," Karen said. "He got better. We fed him up. He slept in the barn, but he wouldn't come to the house. And in the spring, he just started disappearing during the day. He'd come back at night to eat. Then one week, he didn't come back at all. We looked for him. He was gone. We figured somebody must have taken him in. Or," she shrugged, "or that he'd found the road he was looking for." Aggie said, "Mama, Mama, is he going home now?" Karen looked at her daughter. Then she looked at Bear. Then she looked at Nora. "He looks good," she said quietly. "He's got a good place to stay," Nora said. "He's got a family. She's 10 years old." Karen Peterson nodded once. She said, in a voice that had a smile in it and also a sadness, "Well, that's better than the barn. That is 100% better than the barn." She knelt down. "Hi, buddy," she said. "You look real good." Bear went forward 1 step. He pushed his nose against Karen Peterson's hand. He remembered. He remembered. Nora drove home in the afternoon light with Bear beside her, and she thought about what a dog had done, coming up out of the woods around an old sawmill, healing in a stranger's barn, then slipping away in the spring and living in the trees behind the fields of a family he did not belong to, watching, waiting. Because he had known. Somehow he had known. He had known Rusty would come back. He had known that little girl he had loved was still in that house. He had known she was going to need him. He had waited 3 years. He had waited 3 years for the night she would come running. Nora pulled the truck into the shelter lot at sunset. Bear jumped down. Copper came around the corner of the building at his heavy old trot to meet him. The 2 dogs bumped shoulders. Bear went inside first. Copper followed. Nora stood in the parking lot for a long moment with her hand on the door of the truck. She looked at the field behind the shelter. The stubble was gone. The frost was gone. There was a haze of new spring green over everything, and a wind was coming up out of the west that smelled like rain and dirt and something growing. She thought about a lot of things. She went inside. The next morning she began a file. She called it the Bear File. It was a simple manila folder that she stuck in the top drawer of the filing cabinet behind her desk. Every dog that came into the Ashfield County shelter from that day forward got a note in the Bear File. Not just its intake papers, not just its adoption record, a note. A note in Nora Fielding's own handwriting about who this dog was, what its face said, what its shoulders said, what its silences said, where it looked when the door opened, whether the hair on the back of its neck went up when a certain kind of man walked in, or when a certain tone of voice came out of a phone, or when a certain child ran through the front door in tears. She started training the dogs to notice, not to bite, not to attack, to notice. To sit down beside a child who had gone quiet in the corner of the play yard. To lean their weight against a woman crying in the office. To look at a man who had signed his name a little too fast on the adoption paperwork. The volunteers started training with her. Delia Ortega came out on Saturday afternoons. Pastor Jennings came on Sundays after church. Marla Deacon, who could no longer bend at the knees to pet a dog, sat in a folding chair in the corner of the yard and told the dogs stories about the county and about the people who had lived in it. And the dogs sat around her feet and listened as if they were hearing something they had always suspected. The county did increase the shelter's budget when the new commission was sworn in after the fall election. They doubled it, in fact. And they gave Nora a plaque she immediately put in a drawer, and a title she did not use, and a certificate of appreciation from the state legislature that she framed and put in the front hallway, because Toby thought that one was funny, and it made him laugh. Lila Weston came to the shelter every Saturday from the day she was released from the hospital. She would come in the passenger seat of her mother's car with a small paper bag of cut-up hot dogs and a book to read to the dogs while she sat cross-legged on the concrete floor of the runs. She read all of Charlotte's Web to Copper twice in her small, serious voice. And by the second time through, Copper had begun to whine at all the right places. She would not tell anybody which parts he whined at. She read to Bear too, but Bear did not need the story. Bear just needed her to be alive and in the same room with him. He would put his head in her lap and close his amber eyes and breathe. And that was all he wanted for as long as she would sit still, which was hours. Cyrus Weston came too, once he had started to come out of his own shell. He came at first with his mother. He would stand at the far end of the aisle between the runs with his hands in his hoodie pockets, and he would not say anything, and he would look at the dogs looking back at him. After a few weeks, he started to come without his mother. He started to walk one particular dog, a heavy brindle mix named Ranger, who had come in from a highway ditch with a broken tail and a bad attitude. And by June, Ranger had a new tail and no attitude at all and lived with Cyrus in his bedroom. Toby Marlowe enrolled in the county community college in the fall. He wanted to be a veterinarian. Nora had made him promise in writing that he would come back to Ashfield when he was done. He had said, in that stiff-shouldered way of his, that she did not need to make him promise, that he was not going anywhere else. Rachel Weston divorced her husband, who had known and had said nothing. She and Lila and Cyrus moved into a small rental house in town, and she got a job at the diner working for Marla Deacon. Marla worked her hard and paid her fair. Rachel started sleeping through the night by the second month. Lila started laughing again by the third. A whole year went by, then another. On the second anniversary of the night the dogs had sung one voice into the dark, Nora Fielding was closing up the shelter at 10 o'clock in the evening. It was late September. The nights had turned cool again. The field behind the building was gold with cut hay. Copper was moving slower now. He had grown grayer around his big loose lips, and he did not go on his morning walks anymore. He slept most of the day. But he still slept on the folded quilt in the office, and he still came out of the office when he heard Nora call his name. Bear was in his 11th year now, if Nora's guess about his age was right. He had gotten a little heavier and a little slower himself. He still lived at the shelter. Lila and Rachel had asked once if they could take him home. Nora had asked Bear. Bear had gone and stood in the office door with his back to the parking lot and had looked at Nora, and Nora had looked at Lila, and Lila, who was 11 now and understood a great deal, had said quietly, "He wants to be with the pack, Mama. It's okay. I know where he is." She came almost every day. That night, at 4 in the morning, Nora Fielding woke up in her cot behind the office to a sound she had heard once before in her life. Every dog in the building was howling. One voice, 40 throats, pointed at the same back wall, the same dark field. She sat up. She grabbed the flashlight. Her heart was hammering, but then she stopped. She listened. The howling was different this time. It was not the aching climbing rope of sound that had come out of the cinder block walls 2 years ago. It was rounder than that. It was fuller. It was the pack singing the way a pack sings when it is telling itself a story, when it is remembering, when it is marking the night that made the pack a pack. She got up slowly. She put on her coat and her boots. She went into the runs. Bear was standing at the door of his kennel with his ears forward and his tail low, singing along in that broken low voice of his. Copper was in the office doorway with his old head thrown back, singing with the voice of a much younger hound. Every dog she'd ever taken in and could not place out. Every dog she had helped through a hard first week. Every dog she had watched drive away in the passenger seat of a stranger who had become the right person. All the ones still with her, all of them, singing. She opened the back door. She walked out into the field. The moon was up this time. It was almost full. The stubble was gold under it. The air smelled of hay and cold water and something else, something warm and animal, some memory that lived in the ground and did not need her to name it. She stood in the middle of the field and she listened to her dogs sing. After a minute she heard footsteps behind her, small feet, running. Lila Weston came across the frost-white grass in a puffy purple coat that was one size too small for her now, and one shoe untied. Her hair had grown out. Her cheeks were pink from the cold. She was carrying in one small mitten a paper bag of cut-up hot dogs. She stopped beside Nora and slid her mittened hand into Nora's. She was as tall as Nora's elbow now. She would not be much longer. "Mama said I could come," she said. "She's in the truck. She wanted me to come by myself." Nora nodded. They stood together in the field and listened to the pack. After a while, Lila said quietly, "Do you hear that?" "I hear that. They still remember." "They still remember, honey." Lila leaned her head against Nora's arm. "I remember too," she said. Nora put her hand on the top of the little girl's head, and she looked up at the moon over the tree line, and she thought about a small pink sneaker in the frozen weeds. And she thought about a bloodhound refusing to move from the lip of a ditch, and she thought about a brown dog with a bent ear who had waited 3 winters in the trees for the night his girl would need him. She thought about a red truck pulling out of a parking lot into the dark, and she thought about 312 people filling a courthouse for a woman who had never in her life thought she was anybody's leader. She thought about how the pack knows what the pack knows. She thought about how the world is not always kind, but sometimes, in the middle of the darkest night, 40 dogs in a cinder block building on the edge of a stubble field will throw their heads back and sing one voice, and somebody will hear them, and everything will be different from that moment on. She squeezed Lila's small mittened hand. "Come on, sweetheart," she said. "Let's take some hot dogs to your friends." They walked back across the field together. The pack was still singing behind the cinder block walls. The moon was still up. The field was still gold. Copper met them at the door with his tail wagging, slow and heavy and sure. Bear was waiting just behind him, his amber eyes on Lila, his bent ear cocked toward her small footsteps on the concrete. They went inside together, the woman and the girl and the two dogs who had heard the truth in the dark. Behind them the field grew quiet again. Above them the moon slid on toward morning. Somewhere in the county, a mother rolled over in her sleep and did not know why she suddenly felt safe. Somewhere else, a boy sat up in bed and reached for the brindle shape at his feet and buried his face in a warm brown coat and cried into it and let the crying go all the way through. And in the little office behind a beat-up desk, in a beat-up building at the end of a county road that most people never took, an old bloodhound circled twice on a folded quilt, lay down beside a brown dog with a bent ear, and closed his eyes. Nora Fielding sat on the concrete floor with them for a long time before she turned out the light. She was thinking about how a night can change a life, and how a howl can save one, and how sometimes the best thing you will ever do in this world will start in the dark, with a sound you were not expecting, and end in the light with a small hand in yours. If this story reached you tonight, wherever you are in the world, do me one small favor. Give the little heart at the bottom of your screen a tap, drop a word in the comments so I know you were here, and hit that subscribe button so you don't miss the next one. There are more nights than we know when the dogs are singing us the truth, and I would love to tell you about the next one.